past 2 years, I've been using this camera right here. This is the Blackmagic Cinema 6K full frame. I use it for professional work, creative projects, but also as an everyday camera. I came from a more hybrid camera like the Lumix S5. So this camera right here actually taught me about filmmaking. And in today's video, we're gonna dive into the lessons I've learned. The biggest thing I've learned using the BMCC 6K full frame is control. This is the first time I'm actually working with Blackmagic RAW, but also tools like false colors are something quite new to me. And compared to Lumix cameras, the user interface of Blackmagic cameras is very clear and simple. If you go into the menu system, everything is categorized or separated into categories like record, monitor, audio, setup. It's very straightforward. The function buttons are very useful. Similar to Lumix or hybrid cameras, you can assign different functions to function buttons on the camera. For example, on the top here, there's 3 function buttons. The first one is assigned to false colors. The second one is the monitor LUT, and the third one is focus peaking. Because I'm shooting sometimes with manual lenses, I was always used to manual focusing. But now with the new firmware update, autofocus is actually not too bad. To have it, it's quite convenient. False colors is definitely one of my favorite tools that I've really learned to appreciate. Small things like the 9:16 grid is actually really useful now, especially with social media nowadays. Having the grids help me to, frame properly for social media. Of course, Blackmagic RAW gives you a lot of flexibility in post, especially if you're messing up the ISO or the white balance. For some reason, I had this weird hum noise, so I have to re-film this part again. What I wanted to add into my lesson that I've learned is the flexibility of working with Blackmagic RAW, because if you mess up your ISO or specifically your white balance, you can easily adjust it in post. So I think that's really interesting, because when you work with hybrid cameras, in my case the Lumix S5 or the GH5, you don't have tools like false colors. You can also not adjust your white balance or correct your white balance in camera. Usually you do it when you're editing software. The Blackmagic camera, you can correct it. It's a great feature to have. Also, the way I shoot handheld. This camera doesn't have any stabilization at all. It does have camera gyro, which you can edit in post because of the data that is also coming with the camera gyro. Coming from the Lumix S5 or the GH5, having really great image stabilization is actually so handy to have with my Lumix S9 right now. This one also has good image stabilization. Basically, I really learned how to move with the Blackmagic camera, almost developing a third eye, and be very careful with how I move and very intentional. At the same time, this camera is not easy to use. It's also not the cheapest option if you think about what you have to get for it, but I think in the long run it's gonna pay out anyways if you have projects and stuff like that. But yeah, battery life isn't great, the files are huge, and you cannot just shoot and call it a day. It actually requires a system. You need enough storage, you need to manage your files properly, especially if you're shooting in 6K RAW open gate. Of course, you can shoot in 4K or 1080p, and also choose different compression options like constant bitrate or constant quality. But it's, yeah, depending on the project and who you're delivering the footage to. But overall, it's a system that also includes your computer that is able to handle those huge files. There are ways around it though. For bigger projects, I usually rig the camera with a V-mount battery and sometimes an external monitor. Although, to be honest, the built-in screen is already really good and bright enough for most situations. I also use a Samsung T5 SSD with 1TB, and I always keep a CFS Press Type B card in the camera. That way I can still use it without the full rig when I want to keep things quite simple. And in the beginning, that actually slowed me down a lot because I wasn't used to thinking about all of that. But now I actually enjoy the process. It kind of reminds me of playing with Lego like a kid back in the days. Another thing I learned is light, because coming from a more hybrid camera like the Lumix S5, the low light capabilities, in my opinion, they seem to be better than this camera. I really have to be intentional with how I shoot, maybe even add an external light. But at the same time, I think it's part of being a filmmaker and learning about the process, adding external light or using natural light to really shape the image, but also be really intentional with how I shoot things. If I'm on a professional shoot, there's so much things that involved in that. It's actually also pre-production, having a shot list in order to not be super confused at the end when you're sitting on your computer and editing this stuff. Yeah, you gotta be really intentional. With that being said, this camera actually slowed me down because I have to think about what you shoot before pressing record. And that is what I mean if it's relating to professional projects or even creative projects. Sometimes you just want to use a good camera to create some nice images. That's totally fine. With this camera, I'm definitely thinking more about composition, framing, and actually what I want to capture. I'm still in the learning phase, and I feel like this camera is definitely helping me to evolve as a filmmaker or to learn my craft a little bit better. Oops. This is Lumix. I actually named my cat after my first Lumix camera. You gotta go now. So let's wrap things up. This camera didn't make me a better filmmaker. It's really the practice, using it on actual shoots, that made the difference. I'm curious how other Blackmagic shooters are experiencing it, especially if, like me, learning. So feel free to share your experience in the comments down below and maybe learn from each other.